Mr. Chairman, first let me express my appreciation to honourable members for the many thoughtful and thought-provoking speeches and suggestions both during COS and budget debate. As Mr. Liang Eng Hua had so eloquently reminded us, we have also favoured us, the Transport Ministry, with the most cuts and allotted time. And let me thank you for that. But fortunately, it is only 50 cuts and not the proverbial 1,000 cuts, if you understand what I mean. Public transport is obviously a topic that is close to the heart of many of our members as well as Singaporeans. And I will try my best to sketch out some of the priorities, some of our key objectives in the coming years, as well as to respond to as many of the questions and issues raised as possible. Before I do so, I thought it would be useful to take stock of what we have been doing over the last 5 years since we announced the 2008 Land Transport Master Plan. With Mr. Chairman's permission, may I request for a summary of the key initiatives undertaken since LTMP 2008 to be circulated to members for reference. Please. I don't intend to run through the handout. I hope that you would take time to look at it. But I want to thank members like Mr. Alex Yam for their concern over the progress of the master plan, and I believe that this summary should give the House an overall perspective of the commitment that we've undertaken to enhance the overall land transport system. I appreciate and understand members' very real concerns about the public transport system. This reflects the feedback that you hear from your residents and your constituents. We take this seriously. And one of the ways we try to understand these concerns better is through the annual Public Transport Customer Satisfaction Survey, which Unisim conducts every year. The latest PTCSS was conducted in October, as usual, October 2012, and it shows that Singaporeans' overall satisfaction with the public transport system has dipped from 90.3% in 2011 to 88.8% last year. Satisfaction levels for bus and rail reliability also fell by around 1 and 3 percentage points respectively. On the other hand, satisfaction on bus travel times rose by 3 percentage points to 79% from the year before, and about 64% of respondents, when asked a direct question on whether public transport had improved in 2012 compared to the previous year, about 64% had indicated so, and it was a yes and no question, so about 64% had said yes. And I hope that we will continue to see further improvements as we embark on some of the measures that I will talk about a little later on. The general drop in commuter satisfaction stems largely from crowdedness and reliability issues. From commuter feedback as well as my own experiences taking public transport, I know that it can be congested on the buses and trains along certain stretches during the morning peak hours. If you take a look at the screen, I think we'll recognize that peak hour crowdedness is not a phenomenon that only happens in Singapore. We see it in all major cities with mature metro systems. I've divided it into two groups. One that sets the standard of about 4 to 5 passengers per square meter, as we see Singapore, Hong Kong, Taipei, London, and so on. And currently, our crowding level during the most crowded periods in the morning peak hours is about 4.5 passengers per square meter, similar to cities like in Hong Kong, Taipei, and London. London, a little bit more crowded, perhaps because their people are generally, of a larger build and size, but these are the cities in this ballpark. The next one shows you what the situation is in Tokyo, in Beijing, and in Shanghai. And I want to assure members that we certainly don't intend to move in this direction. And in fact, we want to do more in order to reduce the level of crowdedness that we currently face. And I will speak more on this a little bit later on. In addition, I know that for commuters, uncertain waiting times for buses mean that the journey is less predictable and more stressful. And when service disruptions or even short delays happen, commuters are inconvenienced. I want to state unequivocally that the government will spare no effort to address these problems. Over the last 2 months, I have announced our long-term plans on increasing public transport capacity, and during the debate on the population white paper, I also covered the improvements over the next 5 years. I would like to assure Singaporeans that dealing with the needs of our commuters here and now is the key focus for my ministry, even as we roll out the longer-term infrastructure plans. So let me now take members through our plans to improve public transport in the near term before moving on to talk briefly about the medium and long-term initiatives. First, we will do whatever is within our means and capability to increase our public transport capacity in the long term. We will further speed up our bus service improvements beyond what we had earlier stated and promised under the BSEP, and this should make for more frequent and less crowded buses as well as more bus routes. We will also run more train trips where possible so that commuters have shorter waiting times. Second, we will make sure that our buses and trains adhere more closely to their schedules and are more reliable. We will do this through stronger regulation as well as incentive and penalty frameworks. And third, we will more actively manage peak travel demand on our public transportation network so that we can spread out and reduce the peak hour loads. Let me elaborate. Mr. Cedric Foo asked about how increase in demand matches up with supply. The journeys have generally increased by about 3 percentage points each year. So I hope you will bear that in mind as I talk about some of the improvements that we're making, that journeys are increasing at about 3 percentage points each year. At last year's Committee of Supply debate, I spoke extensively about the BSEP. This intends to increase the public bus fleet by 20% over the next 5 years, or about 800 new buses, with 550 funded by the government and another 250 by the public transport operators. I would like to update the House that progress has generally been good. We launched the BSEP in September of last year, and as some of you have pointed out, we had injected about 90 buses until the end of last year to improve about 50 bus services that are currently running, as well as to implement 5 new routes. By the end of this year, I would add another 190 buses or so to make up about 280, or about half of the 550 buses that have been committed by the government under the BSEP to be delivered by the end of the year. The feedback I'm getting on the ground from those who have already benefited from the BSEP is actually very positive. But many are asking me, when it's my turn, can you not implement the program faster? Members like Ms. Fumiha, Dr. Lily Neo ask if we can do more to benefit our commuters. I have directed LTA to work with the PTOs to accelerate the BSEP. And given the progress that we have been able to make so far, we will try to complete the bulk of the BSEP service improvements by the end of 2014 instead of 2016 as we originally envisaged. Of course, this is contingent on SBST and SMRT being able to raise salaries and recruit as well as retain enough bus drivers in a tightening labour market. But I think that with some effort on all sides, we can do it. So for those who are already benefiting from the 90 introduced last year, they have indeed given very positive feedback. More will be able to benefit this year, including from your constituencies, and certainly by the end of 2014, we hope to have introduced the bulk of the 550 buses. As I mentioned last month, I have also asked LTA to see how we can tap on the resources of private bus operators, given that the 2 PTOs' resources are already very stretched. In response to questions by, for example, Mr. Gerald Jiam, Mrs. Lina Chiam, Mr. Liang Yinghua, Mr. Seng Han Tong, Mr. Gan Tian Po, one of the things that we will do is to design and contract out 6 more city direct bus services, which will run during the morning peak hours along the expressways into the city, as well as during the evening back to the homes. The proposed new City Direct services will connect towns that are closer to the city area, such as Ang Mo Kio and Bedok, to provide their residents with an alternative to the city other than through the MRT. So in addition to the towns that are further away, we will also include some of the towns that are nearer, Ang Mo Kio, Bedok, around the Clementi area, for instance. We will put up this 6 new routes for tender by private bus operators from as early as the next quarter and start rolling them out by early next year. This will bring the total number of parallel bus services up from 8 previously announced under BSEP to 14, and of the 14, we hope that 9 will be operated by private operators. I do not yet know how they will respond because we have just started this, so in terms of pricing, in terms of the amount of competition that we will face, we will see, we do not know. But the intent is not for the 2 PTOs to participate, it is for the private service operators with their existing capacity to be able to service these routes. Ms. Fumiha also asked whether bus feeder services can be improved. Apart from the City Direct type of services, we will work also with the private operators to see if it is possible for them to run other shorter services during peak hours, such as localized routes in estates that bring residents to the MRT stations. We intend to invite tenders for these short services from the 3rd quarter of this year and to implement them progressively from next year onwards, provided the response from these private operators are good. Such services will add to the existing bus feeders already run by the PTOs and help us to more quickly address the problem of crowded feeder services during peak periods. So we will push out more BSEP buses and have the PTOs run them, and they will augment either the existing trunk or feeder routes as well as introduce new routes. But at the same time, we will want to try and maximize the resources from the private operators who may have some spare capacity depending on their routings to be able to support us in these areas. Let me talk now about trains and what we are doing in that regard. Mr. Liang Eng-hua, I think, said that he saw light at the end of the tunnel. Let me assure him that this light at the end of the tunnel is not coming from an approaching train, even though we will have many more of such trains running in the system, because we will intend to increase train capacity over the next 5 years as we receive new trains and complete the resignaling in phases from 2016. SMRT has also shared with us their plans to buy another 6 trains on top of the 13 that is coming in next year and the 22 trains that were coming in 2016. So 6 more trains on top of those already announced plans. And this will increase the train fleet that we have today by about 30%. The train fleets for the Northeast Line and the Circle Line will increase by about 70% and 60% respectively in 2015 when the trains that we ordered last year will be delivered. I know many members like Mr. Cedric Fu, Dr. Lilinio, Mr. Gan Tian Po remain concerned about what we can do about rail capacity in the short term. To improve the daily commuting experience of the rail network, we will be running more trains wherever possible so that commuters will have shorter waits generally. We intend to improve train frequencies so that commuters will not need to wait more than 5 minutes for the next train other than during the first and the last hour or so of train operations each day when the ridership is very low. Currently, commuters sometimes have to wait as long as 7 minutes, and we would like to bring that down, as I said, to about 5 minutes. We will also step up the frequencies of the trains during the shoulder peak periods so that on average, each train will arrive at an interval of about 3 minutes. So during the very peak periods, it is coming in now at 2 minutes, which is what the limit of the signaling system allows. But at the shoulders, we will step up the frequency or the headways of the trains so that on average, they will come in at about 3 minutes. All these improvements will require the train operators to run, we estimate, about 10% more train trips than what they are currently doing today. Commuters on the north-south and east-west lines will benefit starting from the second half of this year, and those on the north-east and circle lines will benefit when the new trains are progressively delivered starting 2015. And let me assure members, therefore, that there will be more train trips during heavy loading periods to cope with the growing ridership in the coming years. I have talked about capacity improvements in the short term that will help us cope with high ridership. But as many members like Mr. Gantiampo, Dr. Lilinio have rightly pointed out, what also matters is that the buses and trains come regularly. I share the sentiment. Even with more buses from the PSEP, commuters tell me that waiting times for buses at their bus stops can be irregular. Sometimes they wait a long time for their bus, and then 2 or 3 buses come all together, especially during peak hours, like what Ms. Fumiha had so eloquently described. Let me first touch on bus speeds and reliability. We will give even more priority to buses on our roads. Today, we have about 180 kilometers of bus lanes and the mandatory giveaway to buses scheme at over 200 locations. Over the next 2 years, we will spend about $50 million to enhance bus priority. We will add about 30 kilometers more of bus lanes, increase the mandatory giveaway to buses scheme by another 150 bus stops, and quadruple the number of bus hubs where several buses can come in and pick up passengers or discharge them all at the same time. And currently we have about 10, and we will quadruple that to about 40. We will also have to step up enforcement of bus priority schemes, as infringements by motorists result in delays for buses and their commuters. Over and above the existing quality of service standards, we will also introduce a quality incentive framework to improve the regularity of bus waiting times for commuters. Under this new framework, operators will need to enhance their en route management of their bus operations to earn incentives and to avoid penalties. This means making appropriate interventions, giving guidance to the bus drivers even as the buses are running on the road. In effect, what it means is that the ops center will have to be a lot more busy, will have to be a lot more proactive and prescriptive to help buses reduce the incidence of bus bunching or the long gaps between consecutive buses. They will have to ask buses to speed up or to slow down where appropriate, and, where necessary, introduce some buses midstream when this is warranted. It's something that London has implemented a number of years ago, and through their experience and revisions over a number of years, they have a system that runs pretty well today, and I'm keen to take a step forward to try this out, and hopefully this is something that over time will address Ms. Fumiha's pertinent concerns about the timeliness of bus arrivals. We aim to trial and refine this scheme on some 25 services, or about 10% of the bus services that we have today, starting in the second half of this year. For trains, I think reliability is an even bigger issue because a disruption or service delay affects many more commuters. So I agree with Mr. Cedric Fu, who spoke about the importance of train maintenance, as increasing ridership puts even greater pressure on an aging rail system. While our rail operators fare reasonably well compared to other metro systems around the world in reliability, train withdrawals and service delays do adversely affect the travel experience. We have therefore been working closely with the PTOs to arrest the number of train withdrawals and delays. And here I would like to share with you a number of slides to show you what's been happening. This is also data that we put onto the website on a quarterly basis, so that, and in fact even more details than this, so that riders, commuters can actually go in and take a closer look. Since the commencement of the LTA SMRT joint team in June 2012, train withdrawals for the north-south and east-west lines have been reduced from about 4.5 per 100,000 train kilometers in the second quarter of 2012 to about 2.8 train withdrawals per 100,000 train kilometers in the fourth quarter of 2012, and then now you can see to about 2.7 in the first 2 months. So what does it mean? It means that for every 1,000 trips that the train makes, we should see one withdrawal. So one withdrawal for every 1,000 trips, or roughly about, I think, 99.9% success rate of not having a train withdrawal. But I think we cannot stop at this, and in fact we need to do more, because the target that we have set for ourselves is 2.11 for 2013. We believe that it is stretched, but achievable. And over the longer term, we intend actually to reduce the number of train withdrawals to 1 for every 2,000 train trips. The Northeast lines and the Circle lines have actually relatively healthier train withdrawal rates, and they are stable at around 0.7 and 1.2 withdrawals per 100,000 kilometers respectively, compared to the 2.7 that we see for the Compass line. So I've decided not to show a slide, but their health is not something to be taken for granted, and the joint teams that LTA has with SBST and SMRT will also look into the reliability of these lines. Generally, I think doing good work there. Joint teams are working to rectify the overhead catenary system for the Northeast line, which had been problematic between Harbourfront to Outram on 3 occasions over the past 12 months, as well as changing out the power cables for the Circle line, and we should aim to complete that by the end of this year. I've also asked LTA and SBST to start planning for midlife upgrades for the Northeast line and its trains, because it's now entering its 2nd decade of operation, and I think we have learned useful lessons on what has been done or not done for the North, South and East-West lines, and also from our counterparts overseas, and we will apply them to the Northeast line and then to the Circle line. Let me talk about LRT, because I think some of you are particularly interested in this aspect as well. LRT withdrawal rates are generally low because basically the driver in the loop is sometimes able to continue to drive the train even in a degraded mode. So what we track instead are the trends of service delays on our LRT systems, as we are mindful that even service delays without train withdrawals also cause inconvenience to commuters. The joint teams are studying the main faults causing these delays on our LRT systems, as well as ways to shorten recovery time when the incidents happen. So let me share with you a slide on what is happening there. Today we see more stable levels of service delays for the Sengkang Punggol LRT and trends of improvements for Bukit Panjang LRT. As Mr. Liang Eng Hua said, we visited that on 2 occasions, the BP LRT last year. We had LTA work very closely with the operator, and they promised over a 3-year program to try to significantly improve the service delays for BP LRT. So we are seeing some improvement there, and we have to continue to work even more of them on that in the coming years. So you can see for yourself that we have about 2.08 and 1.28 delays of more than 5 minutes for every 100,000 train kilometers on the BP LRT and SP LRT respectively. What it means is that on average for those 2 systems, you should see a service delay of 5 minutes or more, roughly about once a week. So these are systems that operate through most of the day, and it's about once a week that you should see a service delay of more than 5 minutes. With, I think, sustained joint team efforts to rectify these system problems and to actively carry out preventive maintenance, we do expect to see further improvements over the coming months and years. But even as we partner the operators to refresh our MRT system and enhance train reliability, it is the government's responsibility to set the correct standards in line with reasonable expectations of a high-quality public transport system. We are close to completing our review of our real regulatory and penalty frameworks, which will take effect from the second half of this year. We will be enforcing more stringent maintenance and service reliability requirements by increasing the prescribed penalties that operators will face for breaching them. So we are raising the standards, we are also raising the penalties that they will face for breaching these standards. In this regard, we are considering pegging the revised maximum penalty to a percentage of the affected MRT line's total annual fare revenue. Today, actually it is a cap of $1 million, but we think that the more appropriate thing to do is to raise it to a percentage of the affected line's total annual fare revenue as a stronger deterrent against service disruptions and regulatory breaches. We'll continue to review this over the next few months, but we are close to finalizing the framework that we want to implement. The tightened regulatory and penalty frameworks reflect the importance that we place on a safe and reliable MRT system, but particularly on the impact that serious regulatory breaches can have on commuters. And I've also asked LTA to strengthen its existing auditing capabilities so that we can more closely monitor the service quality and reliability of both the train as well as our bus services, and to be more responsive to any lapses that we face. Let me move on now to talk about this new subject of spreading out peak hour travel demand that so many of you have spoken on. Now, even as we work towards increasing capacity and improving reliability, we need to better optimize our public transport capacity, particularly during the peak hours, and especially since the significant improvements to peak hour train capacity will only happen from about 2015 to 2016 onwards with the re-signaling program and so on, on the North-South line. Today, the commuters who face peak hour congestion on trains are predominantly the ones who are trying to reach the city area to get to work. So, for example, if we take a look at the exit data for Raffles Place MRT station, the large majority of commuters travelling to this station every morning make their exit between the 8:30 to the 9 a.m. window. So on the bottom, really it's on the x-axis, 15-minute intervals. On the y-axis, it is exiting passengers. All right, so this gives you an idea of the spread of passengers exiting Raffles Place MRT station during the morning hours up to about 11 o'clock in the morning. The very high peak in commuter loading on our train system is obviously something that we should try to spread out, or what we call in technical jargon, demand management. If we can get 10, 15 to 20% of commuters in the peak period to travel, say, up to an hour earlier, we would achieve a very perceptible improvement in commuters' daily travel experience to get to work. And this will also help us to run a more efficient transport system and better optimize the capacity that we have. Hence, over the last year, we had made our travel discount schemes more attractive to get commuters who are able to shift their travel patterns to do so. Today, under the SMRT's early travel discount scheme, commuters who enter the SMRT network can enjoy a discount of up to 50 cents for the train journey if they exit at any of the 14 designated city area stations before 7:45 a.m. Commuters travelling off-peak, both before or after the peak period, can also accumulate more points to win cash prizes of up to $200 under another scheme called the Incentives for Singapore's Commuters, or the InSing scheme for short. Both schemes have had some effect in reducing peak crowding. The SMRT scheme has seen a 3 to 4% shift to the desired level outside of the peak hours to before 7:45, while InSing has seen significant growth in its membership with more than 68,000 members since its launch in January of last year. Shifting the peak hour demand into the pre-peak period where there is excess capacity benefits both pre-peak and peak hour travellers. Therefore, we are prepared to significantly increase the incentives to encourage travellers who are able to do so to shift their travel in this manner. Over the past week, there's been a lot of discussion on Dr. Janil's idea to allow commuters to travel free on public transport before the peak hours. Many other members, like Mr. Liang Enghua, Dr. Li Bihua, Mr. Cedric Foo, have chimed in support of his idea. And certainly this is an idea that we will not dismiss offhand, and I've asked my staff to consider it seriously. What we are still studying is whether we should simply increase the current 50-cent discount substantially to, say, $1, or to go all the way to make it free for commuters travelling before a certain cut-off time in the morning. But rest assured that we certainly want to do more to encourage more commuters to shift out of the peak hour. I should first qualify that we are not planning to shift every commuter out of the peak period. As some members of the public have since pointed out after Dr. Janil's suggestion came out, if that were to happen, we would simply be creating a new peak but earlier in the morning, and that is not our intent. So the fact that there have been mixed views over whether commuters are prepared to shift their travel times should they be offered free travel is actually quite reassuring and certainly no bad thing. But more importantly, even as we are studying how to enhance the early travel discount scheme for the city area, we also need to work with employers in the CBD. There simply is no point if people get to work early but are unable to start and leave work early. So let me share with you some ST comics which I found quite interesting. Because otherwise what we see here, if they really can't start and end earlier, is that this cartoon may very well come true. You wake up early so that you can get on the MRT in time, say to travel for free, but because you woke up earlier than usual, you end up sleeping at the workplace. As my former military counterparts will tell me, this is exactly what is meant by hurry up and wait. I recall Ms. Irene Ng highlighting during the budget debate the need for employers to consider and improve flexi work arrangements for their employees who wish to travel outside the peak hours. I fully support this. If employees adjust their travel times to come earlier to the office, we hope that the companies will allow them to adjust their working hours and to leave office earlier. The Travel Demand Management Work Group that is co-chaired by Ministers of State Josephine Teo and Dr. Amy Khor will continue to work with employers on flexi work arrangements. Through the Travel Smart pilot launched in October last year, the LTA is already working with 12 organizations to put in place the necessary workplace practices to facilitate off-peak travel for their employees. In response to Mr. Ang Wei Neng's question, the pilot includes both public and private sector organizations. To date, 3 of these organizations have already obtained management approval to put in place flexi work measures for their employees, such as staggering work hours, introducing IT facilities to enable employees to work remotely, and even providing shower and locker facilities. This include, for example, Raja and Tan and BP Singapore. The public sector will also continue to take the lead in enhancing flexi work arrangements and in encouraging it to enable its offices to take advantage of the current pre-peak travel schemes and the enhanced schemes that will follow. In fact, most public sector agencies already offer flexible hours to their offices. And depending on the nature of work, officers in these agencies can choose the time they prefer to start work within a time band and leave office at the time corresponding to their start time, as long as they perform 42 hours of work a week. For instance, if they come in at 7:30 a.m. in the morning, they can leave work at 5 p.m. to have an early dinner with their families. I would like to end off this part of my speech on travel demand management by saying that we are committed to spreading out travel demand outside the peak hour. If we achieve a more even travel distribution, it will be a win-win situation for all. For those who have supportive employers and are able to travel earlier, then they get to enjoy the enhanced benefits that we will introduce and have a less congested ride to work in the morning. But I know that there will be some commuters who will still need to travel during peak hours, for example, because of family routines like sending their children to childcare or to their parents' place before they can go to work. And so they are unable to shift their travel times, even if the employers were to be very supportive of the arrangement. And so while these commuters may not enjoy the discounted travel, I believe that the travel demand management schemes will benefit them also, because they will have a less congested and stressful ride during peak hours if other commuters have shifted their travel behavior. As we work towards faster and more reliable bus and rail journeys, let me also update Mr. Cedric Foo and all members on our plans to make it easier and faster for commuters to get to our train and bus stations. I had earlier announced plans to build 200 kilometers more of sheltered walkways around train stations and bus interchanges under what we call the Walk to Ride program. This comprehensive program will greatly improve connectivity around such transport nodes and other amenities. And to put it in perspective, 200 kilometers of shelter is like being able to cross the entire length of Singapore 5 times without going under the sun. Commuters have asked me, what if I need to walk more than 400 meters because my walking route to the station is not a straight line but weaves in and out of HDB blocks? Mr. Ang Wei Neng too holds these concerns and he would like it to be extended even further. Let me assure these commuters that we do take a flexible and pragmatic approach in building these walkways. In rolling out the Walk to Ride program, we consider straight line rather than walking distance of 400 meters. So it's a straight line distance, we draw a radius around it, and therefore actually the linkways may eventually end up being longer than 400 meters depending on the route that is chosen. Because we want to make sure that we make our public transport services as convenient and as accessible for as many commuters as we possibly can. About 90 existing MRT stations and 43 LRT stations, as well as 25 bus interchanges and 100 major bus stops will be connected. LTA is working with the local communities to plan where, how far, and when the walkways should be built. The tender for the first batch of about 20 MRT stations will be called this quarter, and subsequent tenders will be called every quarter. The list of stations in the first 2 batches of tenders will be posted on the LTA website later today. So rather than me try and run through the list, please refer to the website and see if you are one of the lucky ones. A more comfortable walk to train stations and bus stop matters. So too does less intrusion into the lives of Singaporeans, particularly for residents whose homes are near elevated MRT tracks. While we work with SMRT to step up maintenance for tracks and trains to minimize railway noise, we are also building some 20 kilometers of noise barriers along MRT tracks where the noise levels exceed the NEA guidelines. We expect to begin works later this year and aim to complete them in phases by around 2020. And so certainly residents living close to MRT viaducts like those along certain stretches of Ang Mo Kio station, as mentioned by Mr. Ang Hin Kee, can look forward to a noticeable reduction in noise levels once the barriers are installed. Why does it take so long? The installation of noise barriers will need to be coordinated with ongoing renewal works on the north-south and east-west lines, such as re-signalling, as well as the replacement of sleepers that are used to hold the MRT tracks in place, and the regular maintenance works that needs to be done. No point putting up a barrier, and then when we do the re-slippering works, we have to take the barrier out because we need access to the space to change the sleepers, and thereafter we put it back again. I think it's probably duplication of effort for which we will be held accountable. So it needs to be coordinated with the other works that is ongoing. And certainly I want to assure Mr. Ang Hin Kee and all members that we will try to speed up this installation works as much as possible, but there are also technical challenges like limited engineering hours available. So the next point I would like to make is that it is likely, therefore, that we would have to carry out regular service disruptions, planned regular service disruptions during some revenue hours, so that more time is available for these works to be carried out, and so that the overall improvements to residents and commuters can be completed earlier. This is something similar to what we have announced for the Circle Line when we changed the cable. We will try to, for instance, on that occasion, for some Sundays, revenue service may start several hours later than usual for segments of our rail network. For the Circle Line, we announced that it was between, I think, Mountbatten and Paya Lebar, and certainly for elevated tracks, we will also have to do likewise. And we will give advance notice and try to reduce the inconvenience to commuters as much as we possibly can. So I ask for patience from Singaporeans as we try our best to do these works in the shortest time possible. These numerous improvements to our public transport system entail massive investments. The government has committed to the expansion of our public transport network for the medium to long term. The operators too need to fulfill their roles to ramp up capacity and ensure higher levels of reliability. And as the system ages, the responsibilities of the operators on the rail system become even more important. I thank Mr. Gantiampo for his concern over the role of the PTOs in bringing out greater capacity to meet the expected increase in travel demand. Under the existing rail licenses, the train operators are indeed responsible for replacing and adding capacity to meet ridership needs. On its part, the SMRT has committed $750 million over the next few years to purchase more trains for the North-South and East-West lines, the Circle Line, and the Bukit Panjang LRT under plans to meet increased ridership. I believe I made that point clear in reply to a PQ that was filed by engineer Dr. Lee Bee Hua. For the North-South and East-West lines, the SMRT is also replacing the signalling system. And earlier this year, they had announced their commitment to overhaul the first and second generation trains for the North-South and East-West lines. This is by SMRT. These are necessary investments to enhance and renew the aging rail system and to improve the resilience of the network. We will work with the operators to ensure that they set aside sufficient funds to meet their commitments to these investments where necessary. The cost of these investments would have to be properly shared between the government, the operators, and the public. We must seek a balance where the public transport system remains financially viable for our PTOs, but fares kept affordable for all commuters. As privatized operators, and let me share with you this slide on the average fares, as mentioned by Mr. Cedric Foo, our PTOs are incentivized to keep costs down and improve productivity, also to develop new revenue sources such as rental and advertising, which help to defray operating costs. But more importantly, non-fare revenue helps to reduce the need for fare increases. And this has allowed commuters in Singapore to continue to pay fares that are among the lowest across major cities. So regardless of whether we are talking about privatized model, nationalized model, whatever, I think the most important thing is what is the end outcome for commuters. Do you have a good, reliable system? Do you have fares that are affordable? And I think, therefore, when we compare against some of the major cities around the world, I think our fares generally are quite affordable. And in fact, the percentage of household expenditure that is spent on public transportation has fallen over the years. But we know also that the reality is that operating costs have gone up. Diesel prices went up by about 55%, national wages by over 25% from the 2006 to 2011 periods, while as Mr. Fu had reminded us, our fares increased cumulatively by 0.3% over the same period. So this has put the financials of the PTOs under some amount of pressure, and I think if you will recall from reading the press coverage, this is especially so for the bus industry. We are monitoring the financials of the bus sector very closely, and we will have to explore assistive measures if they are indeed needed. Against the backdrop of worsening bus industry financials, I expect that it will be a challenge for the PTOs to do more to expand and enhance bus services without additional assistance. What form this revenue assistance will take is to be decided. I am mindful of the calls from a number of MPs, led by the redoubtable Mr. Liang Eng Hua and engineer Dr. Lee Bee Hua, Dr. Lee Neo, Mr. Cedric Foo, amongst many others, to freeze transport fares. This has to be considered together with the additional task of studying the affordability of public transport fares, which I recently asked the Fare Review Mechanism Committee to undertake. Whatever fare formula is proposed, we must safeguard commuter interests in affordable public transport fares while balancing against the very real financial pressures faced by the PTOs. In this regard, I share the concerns that have been expressed over the affordability of fares for various groups of commuters, such as the disabled, the low income, and the polytechnic students. Members like Mr. Nis Phua, during budget debate, Dr. Lily Neo, Dr. Lee Bee Hua, Ms. Jessica Tan, Ms. Li Lilian, all the ladies, as well as gentlemen like Mr. Lim Biao Chuan, Mr. Manap, Mr. Chris D'Souza, Dr. Teo Pin, during the budget debate, Mr. Cedric Foo, asked how we can better support them in public transport fares. And also, I thank Mr. Lim Biao Chuan for not only raising the needs of these groups, but also suggesting that the government should take on the burden and the responsibility of paying for these concessions. I thank members for their interest in the recommendations of the FRMC, but let's be patient, let's give them a bit more time, and I think we'll be better able to address questions on fares when the report is released, likely around the middle of the year. And meanwhile, the chairman of the FRMC, Mr. Richard Magnus, has already shared some of his views on concession schemes through his blog, indicating some of his own preliminary thoughts on how fare policies can ease some of life's pressures for some of these groups which may need help. This aspect of our fares policy, I know, is something that we hold dear to our hearts, and I believe in doing more wherever possible. So I've changed from being sympathetic to doing more wherever possible. When we launched our Land Transport Master Plan 2008, we were confronted with a declining public transport mode share, and it was a worrying trend. However, we appear to have turned the corner 5 years on. According to the interim results from the Household Interview Travel Survey for 2012, about 62% of all trips during the peak periods are made on public transport, up from 59% in 2008. So 2008 was 59%, 2012 about 62%. And so that partly accounts for why journeys have increased about 3 percentage points each year. Okay. Also, we find that more car-owning households are using public transport for daily commute compared to 4 years ago. So now there are more people who, despite owning a car, find that it is preferable for them, whether for cost, convenience, or other reasons, to be using public transport instead of their cars. Much of this shift could perhaps be due to the rail expansion program that we had put in place over the last few years. Our rail network has increased by about 30% since 2008. It was about 140 kilometers then, now it's about 180 kilometers today. And we have plans to further expand the rail network to 360 kilometers by 2030. And what we hope to achieve in terms of public transport mode share during the peak periods is, as we have mentioned before, 70% in 2020 and 75% by 2030. But we still have much to do to make public transport a choice mode. Our system and policies must be more commuter-centric and responsive to fundamental demographic changes, such as an aging population. Commuters must be convinced that public transport can serve their needs and get them to their destinations reliably and comfortably. As part of the process for LTMP 2013, we conversed with a wide range of stakeholders on the land transport system through our Singapore conversation, through focus group discussions and online fora. Public transport commuters, motorists, cyclists, taxi drivers, customers, commuters, as well as environmentalists and academics have shared their views. And I thank all stakeholders who have contributed to the formulation of the LTMP 2013, which we will formally launch probably in the second quarter. But let me assure Singaporeans, including Ms. Faiza Jamal, that our partnership did not end then. For instance, as part of the preliminary planning for the Cross Island Line later this year, we will be engaging citizens like herself who are concerned about the impact of the Cross Island Line on the Central Catchment Nature Reserve, which is also a natural heritage that we must share and safeguard as a nation. We will continue to converse with stakeholders as we implement the master plan. The diverse and sometimes conflicting views of commuters and stakeholders have helped to sharpen our focus as well as better understand the trade-offs in addressing the key issues before us. Over the last 2 months, I shared some of our plans for the longer term. Many Singaporeans have asked whether the plans are indeed sufficient to cope with a higher population in 2030. Given the exceptionally high level of ridership growth of our public transport system of 35% in the last 5 years and the day-to-day experience of crowded public transport, many Singaporeans were concerned whether we could cope. We can cope. First, the nation is expecting the rate of population growth to slow down, and the government is resolute on this. Ridership will continue to increase even as we shift mode share, and with population growth, in the most extreme case, by some 20 to 30% from what it is today, based on the population scenario of 6.5 to 6.9 million. Right? So if it's 6.5 million, it will be about 20% increase from what it is today. If it's 6.9 million, it will be 30% from what it is today. On the other hand, by 2030, we will double our rail network to about 360 kilometers and more than double the overall MRT capacity, delivering commuters into the CBD. So I'm confident that we will have enough capacity to meet demand over the long term. More importantly, with new rail lines like the Cross Island Line and Jurong Region Line, Singaporeans will be more connected to their destinations than ever before. I said that in time to come, 8 in 10 homes will be within a 10-minute walk of a train station. And therefore, it really means that many commuters will no longer need to rely on bus feeders to get to the MRT station, or they will have a much shorter feeder than what it is today. And therefore, with shorter, more direct train routes from more parts of the island, journey times will also come down. These new rail lines may seem very far in the future, but Singaporeans will not have to wait that long for more connections and shorter journeys. Commuters can already look forward to benefiting from the rail lines that are close to completion. Starting with stage 1 of the downtown line later this year, new lines or extensions will continue to open almost every year for the coming 5 years. Mr. Chris D'Souza will be pleased to know that the downtown line project is on track to serve residents previously not directly connected to our MRT lines, such as those living in HDB estates in Hillview or private estates around the Hillview area along Jalan Jurong Kechil. The downtown line will also effectively add 50% more carrying capacity in the eastern corridor. Residents in Ubi, Kaki Bukit, Geylang Bahru will have a choice of 2 MRT lines to get to the city centre. It is on track. It is on track, and we are watching this very closely for a variety of reasons. We have encountered some problems with conditions, sometimes marine clay, sometimes very huge boulders that we have had difficulty tunneling through. We have also been slowed somewhat because of the number of complaints that residents have made regarding noise. So as much as is reasonably possible and with all due consideration to safety, we will make sure that we try and keep to the schedule that we have promised for the downtown line. Beyond the downtown line is the Thomson line, and that will be completed in phases from 2019. And this will allow commuters to transfer to the 5 MRT lines by then, with 6 interchange stations when fully open. So let me, if I can show you what the map will look like, very complicated, very congested. Today we have about 15 interchange stations in blue, including the LRT interchange stations, to provide connections and transfers for commuters. When the Thomson line is completed, we will have 30 interchange stations. What this means is that we think it will help achieve a better spread of morning peak commuters across the entire rail network, but it will also improve our network resilience so that commuters have alternative routes in the event of a delay or disruption. In the longer term, we will also facilitate more connections and integration between transport nodes, bus, rail, other forms of travel like cycling. I will speak tomorrow on private transport, and later on, Parliamentary Secretary Professor Faisal will also elaborate on the extensive plans that we have for cycling and an inclusive public transport system. So we are planning ahead, expanding capacity, extending reach, and opening up more public transport travel options for commuters. There will be more people taking buses and trains in the long term, but I believe that they will be experiencing faster journeys on a more integrated network, which is more extensive with many more connections. It will be a different public transport system which will meet our nation's transport needs. So, sir, let me conclude. At the Ministry of Transport, we are not just focused on planning for the long term. We are seeking and actively seeking solutions to the real problems that commuters face today. Increasing bus and rail capacity is one prong of our efforts. We are also improving bus and rail reliability so that overall we can reach high service levels that we should expect of a quality public transport system. We are also exploring ways to optimize existing capacities in our public transport system, be it through tighter regulation of operators or encouraging shifts in commuter travel patterns. So let me assure members of this House that the government remains as committed as ever to realize the vision that was first set out in the Land Transport Master Plan of 2008. However, the public transport landscape today has changed from what it was 5 years ago, and we will respond to meet commuters' changing travel needs even as we refresh the master plan. We will spare no effort to strive towards meaningful improvements in commuters' travel experience.